100 Facts About Human Psychology. Close your eyes and breathe slowly. Let yourself settle in as we begin a journey through the landscape of the human mind, where every thought, every feeling, every memory is part of an intricate story that's been millions of years in the making. Our story begins with a simple truth: your brain, right now, as you listen to these words, is the most complex structure known to exist in the universe. Within the 3 pounds of tissue resting inside your skull are roughly 86 billion neurons, each one connecting to thousands of others, creating a web of communication so vast that if you tried to count every connection, one per second, it would take you over 3 million years to finish. But this magnificent organ doesn't work the way you might think. In fact, one of psychology's most fascinating discoveries is that your brain doesn't simply receive the world as it is. Instead, it constantly predicts what it expects to experience, and then checks those predictions against reality. Right now, as you rest, your brain is running millions of tiny simulations, anticipating what might come next. This is why, when something unexpected happens, it captures your attention so completely. Your prediction was wrong, and your mind needs to update its model of the world. This predictive nature reveals something profound: you are not passively experiencing reality. You are actively constructing it, moment by moment. And nowhere is this more apparent than in how you perceive time itself. When you're engaged in something new and stimulating, your brain creates more memories, more detailed predictions. Later, when you look back, all those memories make the experience feel like it lasted longer. But when you're bored, doing the same routine activities, your brain conserves energy by creating fewer distinct memories. This is why childhood summers felt endless, but last week might feel like a blur. It's not that time speeds up as you age, it's that novelty creates the sensation of duration. This brings us to something rather beautiful: your brain is always seeking patterns, always trying to make sense of the chaos around you. Even in this moment, as you relax, your mind is finding connections, drawing meaning from seemingly random information. This tendency is so powerful that you can even see faces in clouds or hear voices in white noise. Psychologists call this pareidolia, and it reveals a fundamental truth about human consciousness: we are meaning-making creatures, unable to tolerate randomness for long. And yet, despite this constant search for meaning, your conscious mind is only experiencing a tiny fraction of what your brain actually does. Studies suggest that consciousness processes about 40 bits of information per second, while your unconscious mind handles roughly 11 million bits per second. Everything you see, hear, and feel right now has been filtered, selected, and simplified before it reaches your awareness. Your conscious experience is like watching a carefully edited film, not the raw footage of reality. This editing process serves a crucial purpose: it protects you from being overwhelmed. Your unconscious mind acts as a guardian, filtering out the irrelevant and bringing only the most important information into your awareness. Right now, you probably weren't thinking about the feeling of your clothes against your skin, or the temperature of the air, or the tiny sounds in the background, until I mentioned them. These sensations were always there, but your mind had deemed them unimportant, allowing you to focus on what matters. This selective attention explains one of psychology's most counterintuitive findings: you can look directly at something and not see it. In experiments, people watching a video and counting basketball passes often completely miss a person in a gorilla suit walking through the scene. This isn't a failure of vision, it's your attention system working exactly as designed, focusing your limited conscious resources on what you've decided is important. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. While your conscious mind has these strict limitations, your unconscious mind is quietly learning, constantly adapting, even when you're not paying attention. This is why you can suddenly solve a problem after sleeping on it, or why the answer to a question pops into your head hours after you've stopped thinking about it. Your unconscious mind was working on it all along, beneath the surface of your awareness. And this unconscious processing is especially active during rest and sleep, which brings us full circle to this moment right now. As you relax and let your mind wander, you're not wasting time. You're allowing your brain to consolidate memories, process emotions, and make connections between ideas that might never occur to you during focused, conscious thought. The ancient Greeks believed that the god of sleep, Hypnos, was the brother of death. But psychology reveals the opposite. Sleep and rest are when your mind truly comes alive, reorganizing itself, preparing for whatever comes next. So rest now, knowing that even as you drift, even as your conscious mind grows quiet, the story of your psychology continues, deeper and richer than you ever imagined. As you sink deeper into relaxation, let's follow that thread of sleep and rest a little further, because what happens when you close your eyes reveals something extraordinary about who you are. When you dream, you're not simply watching random images flicker across the screen of your mind. Your brain is actually paralyzed during REM sleep, the stage where most vivid dreams occur. A tiny cluster of neurons in your brainstem actively shuts down the motor signals to your muscles, preventing you from acting out your dreams. This paralysis is so complete that if someone were to watch you dream, they would see your eyes darting rapidly beneath closed lids while the rest of your body lies perfectly still. This mechanism is a gift from evolution, protecting you from the chaos that would ensue if your sleeping body tried to run from dream tigers or climb dream mountains. But here's what makes this even more fascinating. Despite this paralysis, your emotions during dreams are completely real. The fear you feel in a nightmare triggers the same physiological responses as fear in waking life. Your heart races, stress hormones flood your system, and the emotional centers of your brain light up exactly as they would facing an actual threat. In this way, dreams serve as a kind of emotional rehearsal space, a safe theater where your mind can practice responding to situations without real-world consequences. This emotional authenticity points to something deeper about human psychology. Your emotions are not obstacles to clear thinking, as philosophers once believed. They are, in fact, essential to rational decision-making. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio studied patients with damage to the emotional centers of their brains and discovered something unexpected. These patients could reason logically, could understand the pros and cons of decisions, but they couldn't actually make choices. They would deliberate endlessly over trivial matters, like what to eat for lunch, because without emotional signals to guide them, every option seemed equally valid. Your feelings, it turns out, are not the opposite of reason. They are reason's necessary partner, providing the values and priorities that make decisions possible. This partnership between emotion and reason shapes every moment of your conscious life, including how you remember your past. Your memory is not like a video recording that you can play back with perfect accuracy. Instead, every time you recall a memory, you're actually reconstructing it, piecing it together from fragments. And here's the remarkable part. Each time you remember something, you change it slightly. The act of remembering makes the memory malleable, vulnerable to new information, current emotions, and present circumstances. That cherished childhood memory you've revisited 100 times? It's been rewritten 100 times, like a story passed down through generations, maintaining its essential truth while shifting in the details. This reconstructive nature of memory means that you are, in a very real sense, constantly rewriting your own history. The person you were 10 years ago exists now only in the stories you tell yourself, stories that shift and evolve as you do. This isn't a flaw in your psychology, it's a feature. It allows you to maintain a coherent sense of self even as you grow and change. Your past adapts to make sense of your present, creating a continuous narrative thread that connects who you were to who you are becoming. And who you are is profoundly shaped by something you rarely think about, your relationship with yourself. Psychologists have discovered that you actually have a relationship with yourself in much the same way you have relationships with other people. You can be kind to yourself or cruel, supportive or critical, patient or demanding. This internal relationship, this ongoing dialogue between you and yourself, is one of the strongest predictors of mental well-being. People who treat themselves with compassion, who speak to themselves as they would to a good friend, navigate life's difficulties with greater resilience than those who maintain a harsh, critical inner voice. This inner voice is something you've been developing since childhood, shaped by the voices of parents, teachers, and the culture around you. But here's the empowering truth: it can be changed. Your brain retains plasticity throughout your life, the ability to form new neural pathways and reshape existing ones. That critical voice that says you're not good enough? It's not a fixed feature of your personality. It's a learned pattern, and patterns can be unlearned. Every time you choose a kinder thought, you're literally rewiring your brain, strengthening neural pathways that support self-compassion and weakening those that maintain self-criticism. This neuroplasticity extends to virtually every aspect of your psychology. For decades, scientists believed that personality was fixed by early adulthood, that you were essentially stuck with the traits you developed in youth. But longitudinal studies following people across their entire lives have revealed something different. People continue to change throughout their lives, often becoming more agreeable, more conscientious, more emotionally stable as they age. You are not trapped by who you were. Your personality is more like a garden than a statue, living and growing, shaped by cultivation and care. This capacity for change exists even in your happiest and darkest moments. Psychologists studying well-being have found that about 50% of your happiness level is determined by genetics, your natural set point. 10% comes from life circumstances, things like income, marital status, and where you live. But that remaining 40%? That's determined by your intentional activities, the choices you make every day about how to spend your time and where to direct your attention. This means you have far more control over your well-being than you might think. Happiness isn't something that simply happens to you, it's something you can actively cultivate through your daily choices and habits. And here's perhaps the most beautiful discovery about human happiness: it comes not from avoiding negative experiences, but from finding meaning in them. People who've faced significant hardships, who've struggled with loss or trauma, often report experiencing what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. They don't simply return to their baseline after tragedy, they actually report greater appreciation for life, stronger relationships, and a deeper sense of purpose than they had before. This doesn't mean trauma is good or should be sought out. Rather, it reveals something profound about human resilience. Your mind has an extraordinary capacity to transform suffering into wisdom, to find light even in the darkest experiences, to grow stronger in the places where you were once broken. So as you rest here, breathing slowly, know that you are not fixed, not finished, not defined by any single moment or experience. You are a living, changing, adapting consciousness, capable of growth you cannot yet imagine, holding within you possibilities you haven't yet discovered. Let your breath flow naturally now, as we turn our attention to something you do thousands of times each day without noticing, the way you connect with other human beings. From the moment you were born, your brain has been wired for connection. Infants only a few hours old will turn their heads toward human faces rather than other objects. Before you could walk, before you could speak, before you had any conscious understanding of what a person even was, your mind was already seeking out the eyes of another human being. This isn't learned behavior. It's written into the deepest architecture of your brain. You are, at your very core, a social creature, and your psychology reflects this truth in countless ways. One of the most remarkable manifestations of this social nature is something called mirror neurons. When you watch someone else perform an action, specific neurons in your brain fire as if you were performing that action yourself. If you see someone reach for a cup, the same neural patterns activate in your brain as when you reach for a cup. If you watch someone stub their toe, your pain centers light up. This neural mirroring is the foundation of empathy, the biological basis for the ancient truth that no human being is truly separate from another. At the level of your brain, you literally experience echoes of what others feel. This deep interconnection explains why loneliness is not just emotionally painful, but physically harmful. Studies tracking people over decades have found that chronic loneliness is as damaging to your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It increases your risk of heart disease, weakens your immune system, and even affects how your genes express themselves. Your body treats sustained social isolation as an emergency, a threat to survival, because for most of human history, it was exactly that. To be alone was to be vulnerable. Your psychology still carries this ancient wisdom, reminding you through the ache of loneliness that you need others to truly thrive. But connection isn't just about avoiding loneliness. It's about something more profound, the way other people literally change who you are. Psychologists have discovered that you have multiple selves, different versions of you that emerge depending on who you're with. The person you are with your childhood friends is not quite the same person you are with your colleagues or your family. This isn't being fake or inconsistent. It's a natural feature of human psychology called relational self-theory. Different relationships draw out different aspects of your personality, like light passing through different prisms, revealing different colors that were always there within you. This means that the people you surround yourself with don't just influence your mood or your choices, they actually shape the very person you become. There's a phenomenon psychologists call emotional contagion, where emotions spread between people like invisible ripples. If you spend time with anxious people, you become more anxious. If you surround yourself with calm, optimistic people, those qualities begin to take root in you as well. Your psychology is porous, constantly absorbing and reflecting the emotional atmosphere of those around you. You are not just influenced by your relationships, you are, in part, constituted by them. This social permeability extends even to your most private thoughts. When you think, you often think in words, carrying on an internal conversation with yourself. But whose voice is speaking in that conversation? Psychologists have found that your internal dialogue is shaped by the voices you've internalized over your lifetime. When you encourage yourself, you might be channeling a supportive parent or teacher. When you criticize yourself, you might be echoing someone who once judged you harshly. Your private mind is actually populated by others, a chorus of voices from your past and present, all contributing to what feels like your singular, individual consciousness. Yet despite this profound interconnection, you remain fundamentally alone in one crucial way: you can never truly know what it's like to be another person. Psychologists call this the problem of other minds. You experience your own consciousness directly, from the inside, but you can only infer the consciousness of others from their behavior. This creates what philosophers call the explanatory gap. No matter how much someone describes their experience of the color red or the taste of chocolate or the feeling of sadness, you can never be entirely certain that their inner experience matches yours. Each person is an island of consciousness, capable of reaching toward others but never quite able to merge completely. This fundamental separateness is why understanding feels so precious when it occurs. When someone truly sees you, truly grasps what you're feeling without you having to explain it, it's not a small thing. It's a bridge successfully built across the gap between two isolated consciousnesses. And here's what psychology reveals: that bridge is built not through perfect comprehension, but through sincere effort. People feel most understood not by those who claim to know exactly what they're going through, but by those who ask questions, who listen carefully, who acknowledge how difficult it is to truly know another person's heart. This is why validation is so powerful. When someone acknowledges your feelings without trying to fix them or dismiss them, something shifts in your nervous system. Your stress response calms. Your defensive walls lower. Psychological research shows that feeling validated, feeling that your emotional experience is recognized as real and understandable, is one of the most healing experiences a person can have. It doesn't solve your problems, but it reminds you of something essential: you're not alone with them. Your struggle is witnessed, and in being witnessed, it becomes a little more bearable. And bearing your struggles becomes easier when you understand something counterintuitive about human psychology: suppressing your emotions doesn't make them go away. It makes them stronger. When you try to push down sadness or ignore anxiety, your brain has to work harder to maintain that suppression, and the emotions often burst through with even greater intensity later. Psychologists call this the rebound effect. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater: the more energy you use to keep it down, the more forcefully it springs back up. The paradox is that accepting your emotions, allowing them to exist without fighting them, actually helps them pass more quickly and gently. This acceptance isn't resignation or defeat. It's a kind of psychological wisdom that recognizes a fundamental truth: you are not your emotions. You are the awareness in which emotions arise and pass away. Right now, as you rest, feelings may drift through your consciousness like clouds across the sky. Some are pleasant, some uncomfortable, but none of them are permanent, and none of them define the whole of who you are. You are the sky itself, vast and spacious, capable of holding any weather that comes your way. Breathe slowly and let yourself settle even deeper, as we explore the fascinating ways your mind creates the experience of being you. There's a curious phenomenon that happens when you look at yourself in the mirror. The face staring back at you looks familiar, of course, but psychologists have discovered something unexpected. The version of your face you see in the mirror is not the same as what others see when they look at you. Your brain automatically enhances your mirror image, making you appear slightly more attractive to yourself than you actually look to others. This isn't vanity. It's a protective mechanism called the mirror exposure effect. You've seen your mirror image thousands of times, and your brain has learned to prefer it, to find comfort in it. This is why photographs of yourself often look slightly wrong. You're not seeing your familiar mirror image, you're seeing what everyone else sees, and it feels subtly foreign. This mirror exposure effect extends far beyond your reflection. You tend to prefer things simply because they're familiar, even when you're not consciously aware of the familiarity. Songs you've heard before sound better than new ones, even if you don't remember hearing them. People whose names sound like your own seem more trustworthy. Your psychology is constantly drawn toward the known, the recognizable, the safe. This tendency served your ancestors well, helping them distinguish safe situations from potentially dangerous new ones. But in modern life, it can keep you trapped in comfort zones, preferring the familiar even when the unfamiliar might bring growth. Yet your mind also craves novelty in ways that seem to contradict this preference for the familiar. Psychologists have found that you have what's called an optimal level of arousal. Too much familiarity leads to boredom, too much novelty leads to anxiety. Your happiest state exists in the sweet spot between these extremes, where life is predictable enough to feel safe but varied enough to feel interesting. This is why routines bring comfort but also why you need vacations. Why you love your home but also crave adventure, why the most satisfying life is one that balances stability with surprise. This balance between safety and exploration is managed by one of your brain's most crucial systems, your attention. Attention is far more than just focusing on something. It's the mechanism by which you construct your conscious reality. Whatever you pay attention to becomes, in a very real sense, your life. Two people can sit in the same room and have completely different experiences based solely on where they direct their attention. One notices the dust and feels irritated, the other notices the sunlight streaming through the window and feels peaceful. Your attention is like a spotlight, illuminating certain aspects of reality while leaving others in darkness. And here's the profound truth: you have far more control over this spotlight than you realize. But that control is constantly under siege. Your attention is perhaps the most valuable resource you possess, and in the modern world, entire industries are designed to capture it and hold it. Psychologists studying technology use have found that the average person checks their phone over 100 times per day, often without any conscious intention to do so. These aren't deliberate choices, they're compulsions, habits carved so deeply into your neural pathways that they operate almost automatically. Each time you check, you're hoping for a small reward, a message or notification that triggers a tiny release of dopamine. Your brain has learned to crave these micro hits of stimulation, and this craving can override your conscious intentions, pulling your attention away from what you actually value. This hijacking of attention reveals something important about human psychology. You are, in many ways, a creature of habit. Researchers estimate that about 40% of your daily actions aren't actually decisions at all. They're habits, automatic behaviors triggered by environmental cues. You don't decide to brush your teeth, you see the bathroom and the toothbrush, and your brain simply runs the program it's run thousands of times before. This automation is incredibly efficient. It frees up your conscious mind to focus on novel situations while your autopilot handles the routine. But it also means that much of your life is lived unconsciously, following patterns laid down long ago, some of which may no longer serve you. The good news is that habits, because they're learned, can be unlearned and rebuilt. The key lies in understanding how habits work. Every habit has three components: a cue that triggers it, a routine that follows, and a reward that reinforces it. If you want to change a habit, you can't simply will yourself to stop. Your brain doesn't work that way. Instead, you need to identify the cue and the reward, then substitute a new routine that provides a similar reward. Someone who stress eats might replace the routine of reaching for snacks with the routine of taking a short walk, both providing the reward of stress relief. The cue and reward stay the same, only the routine changes. This is how transformation happens, not through willpower alone, but through understanding and redirecting the psychological mechanisms that drive your behavior. Understanding these mechanisms reveals a humbling truth: you have far less free will than you think you do. Much of what you believe are conscious choices are actually post hoc rationalizations for decisions your unconscious mind already made. In famous experiments, neuroscientists can predict which choice you'll make several seconds before you become consciously aware of making that choice, just by watching your brain activity. Your unconscious mind decides, and then your conscious mind creates a story about why you decided that way. This doesn't mean you have no agency, but it does mean that agency works differently than you imagine. You're not the chief executive of your mind, issuing commands from the top down. You're more like a navigator, gently steering currents that are already flowing. This limited conscious control extends to one of psychology's most surprising findings: you cannot actually multitask. What feels like doing two things at once is actually rapid switching between tasks, and each switch comes with a cost. Every time you shift your attention from one task to another, there's a brief moment where your brain has to reorient itself, to remember context and re-engage with the new task. These moments are brief, just fractions of a second, but they accumulate. People who frequently multitask are actually less productive and make more errors than those who focus on one thing at a time. Your conscious attention is like a single spotlight, and while you can move it quickly between different areas, you cannot truly illuminate two places at once. Yet despite these limitations, your conscious mind possesses one remarkable ability: the capacity to observe itself. You can think about your thinking, feel your feelings, watch your thoughts arise and pass away. This metacognition, this awareness of awareness, is what allows you to change, to grow, to break free from automatic patterns. When you notice yourself spiraling into anxiety, that noticing creates a small gap, a space where choice becomes possible. You're no longer completely identified with the anxiety, you're the awareness watching the anxiety. And in that watching, in that gentle, curious attention to your own mental states, lies the seed of psychological freedom. So rest now in that awareness, that quiet observer within you, watching the flow of thoughts and sensations without grasping at them or pushing them away, simply present to the unfolding mystery of your own consciousness. Let yourself drift gently now, as we explore the invisible forces that shape how you see yourself and the world around you. Your mind is constantly telling you stories, And one of the most important stories it tells is about who you are. Psychologists call this your self-concept, the collection of beliefs and ideas you hold about yourself. But here's something fascinating: your self-concept is not a single, unified thing. You actually have multiple versions of yourself existing simultaneously in your mind. There's the self you think you are, the person you believe yourself to be based on your experiences and memories. There's the self you wish to be, your ideal version, the person you're striving to become. And there's the self you think others see, your perception of how you appear to the people around you. These different selves don't always align, and the gaps between them create much of the psychological tension you experience in life. When the gap between who you are and who you wish to be grows too large, it creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a psychological discomfort that your mind desperately wants to resolve. Your brain finds inconsistency deeply unsettling and will work hard to restore coherence. Sometimes this drives positive change, motivating you to grow toward your ideal self. But often, it leads you to simply adjust your beliefs instead. If you see yourself as a good person but behave in a way that contradicts that belief, rather than changing your behavior, you might redefine what good means or convince yourself that the situation was exceptional. Your mind is less interested in truth than in maintaining a consistent narrative about who you are. This need for consistency is so powerful that it influences not just how you see yourself, but how you remember your past. There's a phenomenon called hindsight bias, where after something happens, you convince yourself that you knew it would happen all along. When a relationship ends, you remember all the warning signs and tell yourself you saw it coming. When an investment succeeds, you recall how confident you felt about it. But if someone had asked you before these events occurred, your predictions would have been far less certain. Your mind retroactively adjusts your memories to make your past self seem wiser, more perceptive, more in control than you actually were. This isn't dishonesty, it's your brain protecting your sense of competence and control in an uncertain world. This protection extends to how you interpret success and failure. Psychologists have identified something called the fundamental attribution error, a systematic bias in how you explain behavior. When you succeed at something, you tend to attribute it to your abilities and efforts, internal factors under your control. But when you fail, you're more likely to blame external circumstances, bad luck, unfair conditions, other people's interference. Interestingly, you flip this pattern when evaluating others. When someone else succeeds, you're more likely to think they got lucky or had advantages. When they fail, you assume it reveals something about their character or abilities. This bias helps protect your self-esteem, but it also distorts your understanding of both yourself and others, making it harder to learn from failure or feel genuine joy in others' success. Your self-esteem, that overall sense of your own worth, functions like a psychological immune system. Just as your body fights off infections to keep you physically healthy, your self-esteem fights off threats to your sense of value and competence. When something happens that challenges your self-worth, a complex set of psychological defenses automatically activate. You might downplay the importance of the area where you failed, emphasize your strengths in other areas, or compare yourself to people who are doing even worse. These defenses operate largely outside your awareness, quietly working to maintain your psychological equilibrium. But here's where it gets interesting: high self-esteem doesn't always lead to the outcomes you'd expect. For decades, psychologists and educators assumed that building self-esteem was the key to success, that if people felt good about themselves, they would naturally perform better. But research has revealed something more nuanced. Self-esteem that's built on genuine accomplishment and accurate self-knowledge does correlate with positive outcomes. But inflated self-esteem, praise without substance, actually predicts worse outcomes. People who've been told they're special and talented without developing real skills become fragile, avoiding challenges that might reveal their limitations. True confidence comes not from believing you're already perfect, but from trusting that you can handle difficulty, that you can learn and grow when you inevitably stumble. This trust in your ability to grow is what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset, and it's one of the most powerful psychological factors in determining how far you'll go in life. People with a growth mindset believe that abilities can be developed through effort and learning. They see challenges as opportunities and failures as information. People with a fixed mindset believe abilities are innate and unchangeable. They avoid challenges that might reveal their limits and interpret failure as evidence of fundamental inadequacy. The remarkable thing is that these mindsets become self-fulfilling prophecies. The person who believes they can grow puts in more effort, persists longer, and ultimately develops more skill. The person who believes ability is fixed gives up sooner and never discovers what they might have become. Your beliefs about yourself don't just affect your effort, they actually alter your physiology. In studies on what's called the placebo effect, people who believe they're receiving effective treatment often experience real physical improvements, even when the treatment is completely inert. Your mind's expectations can trigger genuine biological changes, reducing pain, lowering blood pressure, even affecting immune function. This isn't mind over matter in some mystical sense. It's your brain, which controls your entire body, responding to what it believes is true. Your psychology and your biology are not separate systems, they're intimately intertwined, each constantly influencing the other. This mind-body connection reveals itself in how stress affects you. When you perceive a situation as threatening, your body initiates the stress response. Your heart rate increases, your breathing quickens, stress hormones flood your system. This response evolved to help you survive physical dangers, preparing you to fight or flee. But in modern life, the threats are usually psychological rather than physical. Your body can't tell the difference between a predator chasing you and a deadline looming. It responds the same way, flooding you with arousal and energy that has nowhere to go. Chronic activation of this stress response, triggered repeatedly by psychological threats, slowly damages your body, contributing to everything from heart disease to weakened immunity to accelerated aging. But here's the hopeful discovery: how you think about stress matters as much as the stress itself. Psychologist Kelly McGonigal's research shows that people who view stress as harmful, as something to be avoided at all costs, suffer more negative health effects from stress than people who view it as a natural, potentially enhancing response. When you interpret the physical sensations of stress as your body gearing up to meet a challenge, as energy mobilizing to help you perform, the stress response actually shifts. Your blood vessels don't constrict as much, your heart works more efficiently. The same level of stress, interpreted differently, produces different biological outcomes. This means your relationship with stress, the story you tell yourself about what it means, can literally change how it affects your body and mind. So as you lie here, Breathing slowly, notice that even now, your thoughts are shaping your physical experience. Notice how a peaceful thought can soften your muscles, how a worried thought can tense them again. You are not just a mind in a body or a body with a mind. You are a unified system, a continuous feedback loop where psychological and physical constantly dance together, each shaping the other, creating the seamless experience you call being alive. Settle deeper into stillness now, as we turn toward one of the most mysterious aspects of your psychology, how you experience the passage of time and construct your sense of reality. Time, as you experience it, is not the uniform, mechanical progression measured by clocks. It's a psychological construct, fluid and subjective, expanding and contracting based on your state of mind. When you're in a state of flow, completely absorbed in an activity that perfectly matches your skill level, hours can pass in what feels like minutes. Your sense of self fades into the background, your inner critic goes quiet, and you become one with what you're doing. Psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who first studied this state extensively, found that people report flow experiences as among the most satisfying moments of their lives, yet during flow itself, they're barely conscious of their own happiness. Joy, in its purest form, seems to require a forgetting of the self, a dissolution of the boundary between you and your experience. This dissolving of boundaries reveals something profound about consciousness. The self you think of as solid and continuous is actually more like a verb than a noun, a process rather than a thing. The you reading these words right now is not the same you that existed a moment ago. Every second, millions of cells in your body die and are replaced. Every experience changes the physical structure of your brain, strengthening some neural connections and weakening others. The molecules that make up your body are constantly being exchanged with the environment. You are not a fixed entity moving through time, you are a pattern that maintains itself while everything within it changes, like a whirlpool that persists even as the water flowing through it is never the same. This impermanence extends to your memories, which you might think of as your most permanent possessions, the unchanging record of who you've been. But neuroscientists have discovered that memories are not stored like files in a computer. Each time you remember something, you're reconstructing it from scattered pieces distributed throughout your brain. And here's the unsettling part: you can't tell the difference between a real memory and a false one. In studies, researchers have successfully implanted entirely fabricated memories into people's minds, complete with sensory details and emotional conviction. People can remember, with absolute certainty, events that never happened. Your past, as you remember it, is not a factual record but a story you've been telling yourself, edited and revised with each retelling. This malleability of memory means that you can, to some extent, reshape your relationship with your past. Trauma therapy works partly by helping people reconsolidate traumatic memories, accessing them in a safe environment where they can be updated with new emotional information. The memory doesn't disappear, but its emotional charge can be reduced. This is possible because your brain doesn't distinguish between remembering and experiencing. The same neural networks activate whether you're living through something or vividly recalling it. This is why remembering happy times can lift your mood, and why ruminating on painful memories can re-traumatize you. Your past continues to shape your present not through what actually happened, but through how you remember and interpret what happened. Your interpretation of events is governed by something psychologists call your explanatory style, the habitual way you explain why things happen. Some people have an optimistic explanatory style. When something bad happens, they see it as temporary, specific to the situation, and caused by external factors. When something good happens, they see it as permanent, reflecting their general abilities, and caused by their own efforts. People with a pessimistic explanatory style reverse this pattern, treating bad events as permanent and pervasive while dismissing good events as flukes. These explanatory styles become self-reinforcing. The optimist's interpretation fuels resilience and continued effort. The pessimist's interpretation breeds helplessness and withdrawal. Your habitual way of explaining your life to yourself becomes, over time, a significant determinant of your life's trajectory. This internal narrative shapes not just your mood but your actual capabilities. Psychologists have documented something called stereotype threat, where simply being reminded of a negative stereotype about a group you belong to can impair your performance. Women reminded of the stereotype that women are bad at math perform worse on math tests. Older adults reminded of stereotypes about aging and memory perform worse on memory tasks. Your performance drops not because the stereotype is true, but because the anxiety and self-doubt it triggers consume mental resources you would otherwise use for the task itself. Your beliefs about your abilities, whether those beliefs come from within or are imposed from without, literally change what you're capable of in any given moment. But capability is also constrained by something more fundamental, attention, which functions like a spotlight with a limited battery. Research by psychologist Roy Baumeister has shown that self-control and decision-making draw from a limited pool of mental energy. This is why you're more likely to give in to temptation at the end of a long day of making decisions. Each choice, each act of self-control, each moment of focused attention depletes this resource, leaving you with what Baumeister calls ego depletion. This is why successful people often structure their lives to minimize trivial decisions. They wear the same clothes, eat the same breakfast, follow consistent routines. They're not being rigid, they're conserving mental energy for the decisions that actually matter, protecting their limited reservoir of willpower for when they truly need it. Yet willpower is not the only path to change. In fact, psychology reveals that the most sustainable changes come not from forcing yourself to do things you don't want to do, but from changing what you want. When you make a behavior part of your identity, it stops requiring willpower. A person who identifies as a runner doesn't need to force themselves to exercise. Running is simply what they do, an expression of who they are. This is why saying I don't eat sugar is more effective than saying I can't eat sugar. The first statement describes an identity, the second describes a restriction. Your brain is wired to maintain consistency with your sense of identity, making identity-based change far more powerful and enduring than willpower-based change. This power of identity helps explain one of psychology's most robust findings. People are far more influenced by what they think is normal than by what they think is right. If you believe that most people recycle, you're more likely to recycle yourself, even if you don't particularly care about the environment. If you believe that most people cheat on their taxes, you're more likely to cheat, even if you believe cheating is wrong. Your behavior is powerfully shaped by what you perceive as normal in your reference group. This is social proof, the psychological tendency to look to others to determine appropriate behavior, especially in uncertain situations. You are constantly calibrating your actions against your perception of what people like you do, often without conscious awareness that this calibration is happening. This unconscious calibration occurs because so much of your mental life operates below the threshold of awareness. Your conscious mind processes about 40 thoughts per minute, but your unconscious mind processes millions of pieces of information in that same time. Most of what drives your behavior, your preferences, your reactions, is happening in neural networks you cannot directly access. This is why you sometimes feel, think, or do things that surprise you, that don't align with your conscious values or intentions. You are not just the conscious narrator of your experience. You are the vast, mostly hidden ocean beneath that narrator, filled with currents and depths you're only beginning to understand. And yet, in quiet moments like this, when you simply rest and observe without judgment, you can sometimes sense those deeper currents, feel the workings of the hidden machinery that creates your experience of being alive, here, now, yourself. Let your mind drift like a leaf on water now, as we explore the invisible architecture that shapes how you perceive and interact with the world around you. Every moment of your waking life, your brain is making predictions about what will happen next. These predictions happen so quickly, so automatically, that you're rarely aware of them. But they fundamentally shape your experience of reality. When you reach for a cup, your brain predicts the weight before you touch it, preparing your muscles accordingly. When someone speaks, your brain predicts what they'll say before they finish their sentence. This predictive processing is so central to how your mind works that neuroscientists now believe perception itself is really controlled hallucination. You're not passively receiving the world, you're actively generating a model of what you expect, and only updating it when reality contradicts your predictions. In a very real sense, you live inside a simulation your brain creates, a simulation that's usually accurate enough to keep you alive and functioning. This simulation explains a curious phenomenon: why time seems to slow down during emergencies. When something unexpected and threatening happens, your brain suddenly pays much closer attention, recording far more details than usual. Later, when you remember the event, all those extra details make the memory seem to have lasted longer than it actually did. Time didn't actually slow down, your brain simply created a richer, more detailed recording, and your mind interprets that richness as duration. This is your brain's emergency protocol, capturing as much information as possible when your survival might depend on learning from the experience. But your brain's predictions can also trap you in patterns that no longer serve you. Psychologists have identified something called confirmation bias, the tendency to notice and remember information that confirms what you already believe while ignoring or forgetting information that contradicts it. If you believe you're unlucky, you'll notice every instance of bad luck and overlook your good fortune. If you believe someone dislikes you, you'll interpret their neutral behaviors as hostile while dismissing their friendly gestures as insincere. This bias is not a flaw in reasoning. It's a feature of how your predictive brain works. Your mind is trying to maintain a stable, consistent model of reality, and contradictory information threatens that stability. So your unconscious filters actively work to preserve your existing worldview, even when that worldview causes you suffering. This filtering happens not just with beliefs, but with emotions. Your current emotional state colors everything you perceive and remember. When you're happy, you notice more positive things in your environment and recall more happy memories. When you're depressed, the world seems darker, and negative memories flood to the surface more easily. Psychologists call this mood-congruent memory, and it helps explain why depression is so difficult to escape. Depression doesn't just make you sad about your current situation, it actually changes what you remember about your past and what you expect from your future. The depression creates a lens that filters all of time, past and future, through its darkness. Breaking this cycle requires understanding that your memories and predictions when you're depressed are not more accurate, they're just more negative. This relationship between emotion and perception reveals something important. Your feelings are not separate from your thinking. They are a form of thinking, a rapid, intuitive way of processing complex information. When you meet someone and immediately feel uneasy, that feeling is your unconscious mind detecting subtle cues your conscious mind hasn't yet analyzed. Sometimes these gut feelings are accurate, drawing on pattern recognition honed over thousands of experiences. But sometimes they're misleading, triggered by irrelevant similarities to past situations or by unconscious prejudices you don't even know you hold. Learning to distinguish between intuition worth trusting and emotional reactions worth questioning is one of the most valuable psychological skills you can develop. Part of developing this skill involves understanding your emotional granularity, your ability to distinguish between different emotional states. People with high emotional granularity can tell the difference between feeling anxious, irritated, overwhelmed, and disappointed. People with low emotional granularity experience all negative feelings as simply feeling bad. This distinction matters because emotions are signals, providing information about your needs and your environment. If you can only identify feeling bad, you have no information to guide your response. But if you can identify that you're specifically feeling overwhelmed, you know you need to reduce demands or ask for help. The more precisely you can identify what you're feeling, the more effectively you can respond to those feelings. This precision extends to how you understand others' emotions as well. Theory of mind, the ability to recognize that other people have internal mental states different from your own, is something you began developing as a toddler, but you continue refining it throughout your life. Interestingly, people are generally better at reading the emotions of those from their own culture than from other cultures. Emotional expressions that seem universal, like smiling or frowning, actually carry subtle cultural variations in what they mean and when they're appropriate. This means that much of what you think of as natural or obvious about emotional communication is actually learned, shaped by the specific cultural context in which you grew up. Your cultural context shapes not just how you express emotions, but how you think about yourself in relation to others. Psychologists studying different cultures have found fundamental differences in self-concept. In individualistic cultures, like most Western societies, people tend to define themselves in terms of personal attributes. I am intelligent, I am ambitious, I am creative. In collectivistic cultures, common in many Asian, African, and Latin American societies, people tend to define themselves in terms of relationships and social roles. I am a daughter, I am a team member, I am part of my community. Neither approach is right or wrong. They're different ways of constructing identity, each with its own strengths and limitations. But understanding that your own sense of self is culturally constructed, not universal, can be deeply liberating. The way you've learned to think about yourself is just one possibility among many. This cultural shaping goes deeper than you might imagine, affecting even basic cognition. Studies using eye tracking technology have shown that people from East Asian cultures look at scenes more holistically, paying attention to context and relationships between objects, while people from Western cultures tend to focus more on individual objects, separating them from their background. These differences appear in early childhood and persist throughout life. Culture isn't just a set of beliefs and customs you consciously adopt. It's a lens that shapes how you perceive, how you think, how you experience reality at the most fundamental levels. Yet beneath all this cultural variation, there are psychological universals, aspects of human nature that appear across all cultures and throughout history. All humans form attachments to caregivers. All cultures have music and storytelling. All people experience basic emotions like joy, sadness, anger, and fear. All humans seek meaning, form social hierarchies, care for their young. These universals reveal that while culture powerfully shapes your psychology, there is also something called human nature, a common inheritance you share with every other person who has ever lived. You are simultaneously utterly unique, shaped by your particular experiences and culture, and fundamentally similar to all humanity, driven by the same basic needs and capacities that have characterized our species for hundreds of thousands of years. So rest in this paradox, this strange truth of being human. You are an individual unlike any who has ever existed, and you are also everyone who has ever existed, carrying within you the universal patterns of human consciousness, experiencing in your own unique way the same joys and sorrows, the same longings and fears, the same fundamental mystery of awareness that every human being shares. Breathe gently and let yourself sink deeper into relaxation, as we explore the mysterious ways your mind finds meaning and makes sense of the infinite complexity surrounding you. Your brain is a pattern-seeking machine, constantly searching for order in chaos, meaning in randomness. This tendency is so strong that you find patterns even where none exist. When you see shapes in clouds or hear messages in static, when you notice coincidences and wonder if the universe is sending you signs, you're experiencing apophenia, the perception of meaningful patterns in random data. This isn't a bug in your psychology, it's a feature. Throughout human evolution, the cost of missing a real pattern, like the rustling that signals a predator, was death. The cost of seeing a false pattern was just a moment of unnecessary caution. So your brain evolved to err on the side of finding patterns, even imaginary ones, because in the ancient world, paranoia kept you alive. This pattern seeking creates what psychologists call the illusion of control, the belief that you have influence over outcomes that are actually determined by chance. Gamblers throw dice harder when they want high numbers and softer when they want low numbers, as if their physical effort could influence random outcomes. People feel more confident about lottery tickets they choose themselves than identical tickets chosen by a machine. This illusion provides comfort in an uncertain world, making you feel less vulnerable to forces beyond your control. But it can also lead you to waste energy trying to control the uncontrollable while neglecting the things you genuinely can influence. What you can influence most directly is your attention, and where you place your attention determines, in large part, how you feel about your life. Psychologists studying happiness have found that people are remarkably poor at predicting what will make them happy. You imagine that a promotion, a new relationship, or a beautiful home will bring lasting joy, but these sources of happiness fade faster than you expect through a process called hedonic adaptation. You quickly adjust to new circumstances, and what once seemed wonderful becomes simply normal. This is why people who win the lottery return to their baseline happiness level within about a year. The new wealth changes their circumstances, but not their underlying psychology, not the way they relate to their experience moment by moment. What does influence long-term happiness is something more subtle: how you spend your attention throughout your ordinary days. Research shows that people are happiest when they're fully engaged in what they're doing, regardless of what that activity is. Whether you're working, playing, or doing chores, you feel better when you're absorbed in the present moment than when your mind is wandering. Yet studies using experience sampling, where people report what they're doing and how they feel at random times throughout the day, reveal that minds wander nearly 50% of the time. You spend half your waking life not quite present, your attention drifting to the past or future, to worries or fantasies, anywhere but here and now. And during that mind wandering, you're typically less happy than when you're focused, regardless of what you're focused on. This suggests something counterintuitive. Happiness comes not from pursuing pleasant experiences, but from being fully present to whatever experience you're having. A person washing dishes with full attention can be happier than a person on vacation whose mind is elsewhere. This is the psychological wisdom behind contemplative practices found in every culture. The quality of your life is determined not by what happens to you, but by the quality of your attention to what's happening. Your experience of any moment depends less on the objective circumstances than on how present you are, how open, how accepting of what is. Yet acceptance is often confused with resignation, with giving up. But psychologically, they're opposites. Resignation is a collapse, a withdrawal of energy and hope. Acceptance is an active engagement with reality as it is, not as you wish it to be. This distinction is captured in what psychologists call radical acceptance, the practice of fully acknowledging painful realities without adding resistance to the pain. When something difficult happens, you face two sources of suffering: the pain of the situation itself, and the additional suffering created by fighting against reality, by thinking this shouldn't be happening or I can't handle this. Radical acceptance doesn't eliminate the first source of pain, but it dissolves the second. You still feel the difficulty, but you stop adding the suffering of resistance to the suffering of the situation itself. This capacity for acceptance is closely tied to psychological flexibility, the ability to stay in contact with the present moment and persist with or change behavior in service of your values, even in the presence of difficult thoughts and feelings. People high in psychological flexibility don't have fewer negative thoughts or emotions, they have a different relationship with them. They can have the thought "I'm going to fail" without being paralyzed by it. They can feel anxious while still moving forward. This flexibility is one of the strongest predictors of mental health, stronger even than optimism or self-esteem. It's not about positive thinking, it's about making room for all experiences while still choosing actions aligned with what matters to you. What matters to you, your deepest values, often get buried beneath the noise of daily demands and social expectations. Many people go through life pursuing goals they never consciously chose, climbing ladders leaned against the wrong walls. There's a phenomenon psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, where you keep chasing the next achievement, the next acquisition, the next milestone, believing that this time it will bring lasting satisfaction. But each achievement brings only temporary pleasure before you adapt and start chasing the next thing. This treadmill keeps spinning because you're seeking happiness in outcomes rather than in the living of your life, in the quality of your engagement with each moment and each relationship. Breaking free from this treadmill requires distinguishing between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation comes from within, from finding an activity inherently satisfying or meaningful. Extrinsic motivation comes from external rewards, money, status, approval. Both can drive behavior, but they have vastly different psychological effects. Activities driven by intrinsic motivation tend to be sustainable and deeply satisfying. You do them because they express who you are, because they connect you to something beyond yourself. Activities driven purely by extrinsic motivation feel more like obligations. You do them for the outcome, not the experience, and when the external rewards disappear or lose their appeal, your motivation vanishes with them. Understanding this distinction reveals why so many people feel empty even after achieving conventional success. They've been running on extrinsic motivation, collecting external markers of achievement while neglecting the intrinsic satisfactions that actually nourish the soul. Real fulfillment comes from what psychologist Abraham Maslow called self-actualization, the process of becoming more fully yourself, of developing your unique capacities and living according to your deepest values. This isn't selfish or self-indulgent. It's recognizing that you have a responsibility to become who you actually are, rather than spending your life trying to be who you think you should be. The world doesn't need more people conforming to external expectations. It needs people brave enough to discover and express their authentic selves, whatever form that might take. So rest here in this moment, releasing for now all the external demands and expectations, all the shoulds and supposed tos, and simply be present to the quiet truth of your own existence, the simple miracle of being aware, being alive, being here. Allow yourself to settle into this deep quiet, as we approach the final stretch of our journey through the landscape of your mind, exploring the profound ways you create meaning from the raw material of existence. One of the most remarkable aspects of human psychology is your capacity for what researchers call perspection, the ability to mentally travel into the future. Unlike other animals that live primarily in the present, you spend much of your mental life simulating scenarios that haven't happened yet, planning, worrying, imagining, hoping. This ability to preview the future before living it is what allowed humanity to develop agriculture, build civilizations, create art that would outlast individual lifetimes. But this same gift comes with a psychological cost. You can suffer from events that haven't happened and may never happen. You can feel anxiety about tomorrow, dread about next month, existential fear about the distant future. Your mind's ability to escape the present moment is both your greatest advantage and a primary source of psychological distress. This future-oriented thinking shapes your behavior through what psychologists call temporal discounting, the tendency to value immediate rewards more than delayed ones. Offered a choice between $100 today or $120 in a month, most people take the immediate reward, even though waiting is objectively the better choice. This preference for the present isn't irrational. It's deeply rooted in your evolutionary psychology. For your ancestors, the future was uncertain. A reward today was guaranteed, a promised reward tomorrow might never materialize. So your brain evolved to prioritize the immediate and tangible over the delayed and abstract. In the modern world, where the future is more predictable, this bias works against you, leading to choices that sacrifice long-term well-being for short-term gratification. Yet your relationship with time is even stranger than mere impatience. There's a phenomenon called the end-of-history illusion, where people acknowledge how much they've changed in the past but believe they've now become who they'll always be, that their current preferences and values are final. Studies show that people at every age, from 18 to 68, underestimate how much they'll change in the coming decade. You assume your future self will want what your current self wants, think what your current self thinks. But this is consistently wrong. You are always in the middle of becoming, never finished, never complete. The person you'll be in 10 years will look back at the current you with the same bemused recognition you feel when remembering who you were 10 years ago. This ongoing transformation happens partly through what psychologists call accommodation, the process of changing your mental structures to fit new experiences. When you encounter something that doesn't fit your existing understanding, you have two choices: assimilate it by bending it to fit your current worldview, or accommodate it by expanding your worldview to include this new reality. Growth requires accommodation, the willingness to let your understanding be reshaped by what you experience. But accommodation is uncomfortable. It requires admitting you were wrong, incomplete, limited in your previous understanding. This is why people often cling to outdated beliefs long after evidence has contradicted them. Assimilation preserves your sense of having been right all along. Accommodation demands humility, the acknowledgement that you're still learning, still discovering, still becoming. This humility becomes especially important when considering one of psychology's most sobering findings: you are not a reliable judge of your own competence. The Dunning-Kruger effect describes how people with limited knowledge in an area tend to overestimate their competence, while true experts often underestimate theirs. When you know very little, you lack the knowledge to recognize what you don't know. You confuse familiarity with expertise, confidence with competence. As you gain genuine expertise, you become more aware of the field's complexity, more conscious of how much remains unknown. This is why beginners often sound confident while masters sound tentative. The beginner sees a simple landscape, the master sees a vast terrain full of nuance and uncertainty. This uncertainty is something your mind finds deeply uncomfortable. Human beings have what psychologists call a need for cognitive closure, a desire for definite answers rather than ambiguity. When faced with uncertainty, you feel psychological tension that motivates you to seek resolution, to find the answer, to close the open question. This need varies among individuals. Some people tolerate ambiguity well, comfortable sitting with unresolved questions. Others find uncertainty so uncomfortable that they'll embrace almost any answer, even a wrong one, just to escape the discomfort of not knowing. This need for closure can lead to premature conclusions, black and white thinking, and resistance to new information that might reopen settled questions. Yet some of life's most important questions cannot be definitively answered, which leads to one of psychology's deepest insights: meaning is not found, it's created. Unlike other animals that simply act out their biological programming, you must construct significance from your experiences, weave your individual moments into a narrative that gives them purpose. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, observed that humans can endure almost any hardship if they can find meaning in it, but they collapse under even minor difficulties if those difficulties seem pointless. This need for meaning is so fundamental that you'll create it even from suffering, transforming your worst experiences into sources of wisdom, strength, or compassion. You don't just survive your difficulties, you author stories about what they mean, stories that become part of who you are. These stories you tell yourself have tremendous power. Psychologists studying narrative identity have found that the way you tell your life story is more predictive of psychological well-being than the actual events of your life. two people can experience similar hardships but construct very different narratives about them. One creates a contamination narrative, where good is spoiled by bad, where trauma defines them, where they remain forever victimized by their past. Another creates a redemption narrative, where suffering leads to growth, where difficulties become turning points, where they emerge stronger and wiser. The facts of their lives may be similar, but the stories are different, and those different stories create different psychological realities, different futures. This narrative construction reveals something profound. You are both the author and the main character of your life story, constantly writing and revising the tale of who you are. But you're not writing alone. Every person you encounter is also a character in your story, just as you're a character in theirs. And here's the humbling truth: the character you play in someone else's narrative may be very different from the protagonist you imagine yourself to be. You might see yourself as helpful, they might experience you as intrusive. You might think you're being clear, they might find you confusing. The version of you that exists in another person's mind is not the version you know from the inside. You are fragmented across countless minds, a different character in every story, while somehow remaining the single consciousness experiencing all of this from the inside. This multiplicity of selves leads to one final, beautiful paradox: the more you accept yourself exactly as you are, the more you become capable of change. This seems contradictory, but psychologists have found it to be consistently true. When you harshly judge yourself, demanding that you be different than you are, you activate psychological defenses that actually prevent growth. You become rigid, protective, resistant. But when you meet yourself with compassion, acknowledging your limitations without shame, something softens. The defenses lower. You become curious rather than judgmental, open rather than defended. And in that openness, transformation becomes possible. The paradox resolves: you cannot force yourself to change, but you can create conditions where change naturally unfolds. And those conditions begin with the radical act of accepting yourself completely, just as you are, right now, in this moment, with all your flaws and limitations, all your beauty and potential, all your ordinary, extraordinary humanity. Let yourself rest completely now, as we arrive at the final part of our journey, exploring the deepest truths about what it means to be a conscious, feeling, thinking human being. Perhaps the most fundamental aspect of your psychology is something so obvious you rarely think about it: you are mortal, and you know it. Unlike other animals that may sense danger but don't conceptualize their eventual death, you carry the knowledge of your own mortality with you every day. Psychologists studying terror management theory have found that this awareness of death profoundly shapes your behavior, usually outside your conscious awareness. When reminded of mortality, even subtly, people cling more tightly to their cultural worldviews, become more defensive of their beliefs, judge others more harshly, and seek to bolster their self-esteem. Your awareness of death creates an existential anxiety that rumbles beneath the surface of consciousness, and much of human culture, from religion to art to the pursuit of legacy, can be understood as elaborate ways of managing this anxiety, of creating symbolic immortality through the things you build, the children you raise, the ideas you leave behind. Yet this awareness of death also gives life its poignancy and preciousness. Psychologists have found that people who've had close brushes with death often report a paradoxical effect: they become less anxious, not more. Having confronted mortality directly, they experience what researchers call post-traumatic growth, a profound shift in priorities and values. Trivial concerns fall away. Relationships deepen. The present moment becomes more vivid. They report feeling more alive precisely because they've touched death. This suggests that your awareness of mortality, rather than being purely a source of dread, can be a gateway to appreciation, to presence, to recognizing the extraordinary gift of simply being here, alive, aware, for this brief flicker of time. This appreciation connects to what psychologists call savoring, the capacity to attend to and enhance positive experiences. Unlike pleasure, which is passive, savoring is active. It's the difference between eating something delicious while distracted and really tasting it, paying full attention to the flavors and textures. Research shows that people who regularly savor positive experiences, who pause to appreciate beauty, who take mental photographs of good moments, report significantly higher life satisfaction. Happiness isn't just about having more positive experiences, it's about extracting more value from the positive experiences you already have, about being present enough to truly receive them. But presence itself is more complex than simply paying attention. There's a phenomenon psychologists call ironic process theory, where trying not to think about something makes you think about it more. Tell yourself not to think about a white bear, and white bears flood your consciousness. Try to fall asleep, and you lie awake. Try to relax, and you tense up. Your mind cannot directly control itself through force of will. Trying to suppress thoughts takes mental effort, and that very effort keeps the unwanted thoughts active in your awareness. This is why meditation practices don't teach you to empty your mind, despite popular misconceptions. They teach you to change your relationship with your thoughts, to observe them without getting caught in them, to let them pass like clouds rather than trying to push them away. This observational stance reveals something profound about consciousness. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear. There's a space between a thought arising and your response to it, a gap where choice lives. Viktor Frankl, drawing on his concentration camp experiences, observed that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space is your power to choose your response. Psychological freedom doesn't mean controlling what thoughts and feelings arise. That's largely beyond your control. It means choosing how you relate to what arises, whether you identify with every passing thought or maintain the perspective of awareness itself, watching the inner weather without being consumed by it. This capacity for metacognition, for awareness of your own mental processes, is uniquely developed in humans and may be the most important psychological skill you can cultivate. When you're anxious and you notice you're anxious, something shifts. The anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear, but you're no longer completely identified with it. You're the awareness observing the anxiety, which means some part of you remains untouched by it. This observing self is always available, always stable, regardless of what's happening in your mental and emotional life. It's the still point around which everything else revolves, the constant witness to your ever-changing experience. From this witnessing perspective, you begin to notice something that psychologists call the negativity bias, your brain's tendency to focus more on negative information than positive. One criticism weighs heavier than 10 compliments. One setback feels more significant than multiple successes. This bias exists because, evolutionarily, paying attention to threats was more important for survival than savoring pleasures. An ancestor who overlooked a tiger didn't pass on their genes, an ancestor who overlooked a beautiful sunset did. So you inherited a brain wired to scan for problems, to remember failures, to anticipate disasters. Understanding this bias doesn't eliminate it, but it helps you compensate, to consciously balance your natural negativity with intentional attention to what's working, what's good, what's beautiful. This intentional direction of attention is what psychologists studying well-being call one of the most powerful tools you possess. Where attention goes, neural firing flows, and where neural firing flows, neural connection grows. This means that what you regularly pay attention to literally shapes the physical structure of your brain. If you habitually focus on threats and problems, you strengthen the neural networks associated with anxiety and stress. If you regularly notice beauty and kindness, you strengthen networks associated with appreciation and contentment. You are sculpting your own brain with your attention, creating the neural architecture that will shape your future experiences. This is not positive thinking or denying reality. It's recognizing that reality contains multitudes, and what you choose to focus on expands in your consciousness. Yet even as you shape your brain is always shaped by something larger, your connections with others. Perhaps the most consistent finding across all of psychology is that relationships are the primary determinant of human happiness and health. The Harvard study of adult development, which followed people for over 75 years, found that the quality of your relationships is a better predictor of your health and happiness than social class, IQ, or even genes. People who are more connected to family, friends, and community are happier, physically healthier, and live longer than people who are less well connected. And it's not the number of relationships that matters, it's the quality. One close, authentic relationship contributes more to well-being than dozens of superficial connections. You are built for deep connection, for being truly known and accepted by others, for the vulnerability and intimacy that create real bonds. This brings us to the final insight, the one that perhaps encompasses all the others. You are both utterly alone and never truly separate. You experience reality from a single point of view, trapped inside one consciousness, unable to ever fully merge with another mind. And yet, at the same time, you're part of an unbroken web of relationships and influences stretching back to the first humans and forward to the last. Every thought you think was made possible by language created by countless humans before you. Every emotion you feel is shaped by the emotional atmosphere of those around you. You are a unique individual and also a temporary manifestation of humanity itself, a wave that rises from the ocean, exists briefly as a distinct form, and returns to the ocean, never really separate from it. Your psychology reflects this paradox, the need to be an individual and the need to belong, the desire for autonomy and the hunger for connection, the experience of being one and the recognition of being part of something vastly larger than yourself. So as you rest here now, at the end of this journey through the human mind, you can rest in both truths. You are yourself, this particular consciousness having this particular experience, and you are also everyone, carrying the universal patterns of human psychology that connect you to every person who has ever lived or will ever live. You are limited and infinite, temporary and eternal, alone and intimately connected to all of life. You are a mystery even to yourself, an unfinished story, a consciousness that emerged from the universe to experience itself, to wonder, to question, to create meaning from the raw material of existence. And in this quiet moment, none of that needs to be figured out or understood. You can simply be, breathing softly, aware of being aware, alive to this fleeting, precious, ordinary, extraordinary moment of being human. Rest now. Rest deeply. Let all these insights dissolve back into the silence from which they came, and simply be present to the miracle of your own consciousness, here, now, alive.